Okay. So I'm usually much more professional than this, I swear. Windows decided to update right before the interview. So my computer rebooted, and of course, Zoom forgot my password, as did I. So,
That happens to us too. Happens to us too. So where are you geographically right now? I do get.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am on the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
So Boston.
Boston.
Yeah. Great little town. Or I guess that's a little, but and you guys are out on the West Coast, or
yes, Glendale, suburb of
Los Angeles.
Awesome. So yeah, I figured I'd start by first welcoming you to the show. This is, of course, We've Got Issues presents with Eric and Julia Lewald.
Lewald, just that helps. Lewald.
Longy.
Lewald. Okay, I am so sorry.
No, you wouldn't know, but yeah.
It's one of those issues where I've spent so many years reading it, but have never had to say it right.
And you never heard it, so why would you know? Yeah.
And yet at the end of like every episode, which I continue to watch to this day, I keep on saying it. But you guys are the head showrunners, or were, I guess, of course, of.
I'm pointing to he was the head.
Eric was of XMEN, the animated series.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Welcome. I figured I'd start with a personal anecdote before we continued, if that's all right. So, as I said, and I haven't really talked about it this much on this show before, but your show, when it came out, was so beyond important to me. So I was born with a type of learning disability that at the time, being the early 80s when I was born, but through the 80s, they didn't really know how to deal with that kind of stuff yet, which led to a lot of frustration. So when I was around 10 or so, I was sent to live in a boarding school with other similar type people with similar type issues. And I felt like such a freak there with other freaks, and I wasn't living at home. It was all just bizarre. And then your show came out, and I saw this show about freaks living with, and I use the term freaks loosely, right? But people who were deemed outside the norm, if you will, living in a boarding school with other people of their type. And not only were they living there, and was it okay that they were all there, but that your show did such a great job of both showing that from this setting, both a familial thing can be made, and also the most important lesson I learned from that show that I take with me to this day is it's okay to be different. Right? Like, you can derive strength from being different from other people. So, which just opened my eyes and allowed me to do with the rest of my life what I wanted to do. So, first off, I just wanted to say thank you.
My God, I'm so touched by that. My God.
Yeah, and we were lucky of all the Marvel projects that we could get handed back in 1992 to work on to write stories about. That's what you were talking about is what they came up with for the X-Men, and we saw that and we thought, well, that's the best part of the comics. The best part isn't necessarily who beats who, or who's more powerful, who's more spectacular, which some of the comics were more about, but it was more about this group of different people who discovered this, and how do they fit in with society, or if you're Magneto, how do you just walk away from society? And so giving, the two options, and a lot of people have grown up evidently, feeling different or feeling not part of the mainstream. And it seems to have touched them in that way. So we were really lucky. We've told stories in a bunch of other TV shows, but this one, the stories seem to get deeper into people.
Yeah, well, it's because I mean, I believe it's because I don't know this for a fact, but again, which was this piece into a question, I swear. It was such an unusual thing for the time, right? Supposedly kids, and I use that in quotes because I felt like it was really mature, but it was billed as a kids show, I believe, a Saturday morning animated kids show. That was about people and relationships and interdynamics. And of course, I've seen animated shows mature since that time, but I don't remember anything quite like that before that. This was the first time I saw something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, and we need to give credit, and again, going in the Wayback Machine.
Sure, yeah.
You had ABC, NBC, or CBS. Those were networks,
Right.
and that was Saturday morning. And right around that time, Fox came into existence. It was a baby network, and it was hoping to sort of break in with the big boys, those big three networks.
And get noticed. And the other three networks weren't interested in anything like this.
No.
But the lady that was put in charge of the Fox Kids, Margaret Lesh, wanted challenging shows.
Yes.
And A, because she liked them, but B, because she realized there was a way to differentiate herself from the big three that have been around for 50 years.
And she had been working at Marvel in an executive capacity, really loved the X-Men property, but couldn't
sell it. The other three networks, no, that's just too adult, too challenging,
and
too dark.
people back then didn't know the X-Men. It's hard to remember a time when that's true.
Yeah, I know, because it's also bizarre, and to think, we live in a day and age where who doesn't know the X-Men, who doesn't know what a mutant is, all of this stuff. But the boom for the X-Men was your show. I personally believe your show, Eric. Sorry, the Universal U. I honestly believe it contributed a great deal to this. When it came on, the early 90s, that was really the big boom era for the X-Men. It was big for a while when Chris Claremont came on board, but that was like this early to mid 70s. Then it had kind of started to drop again in the 80s. And then suddenly in the 90s, they relaunched the title, and out comes your show. And yeah.
It was a time where if you walked down the street and asked people, name me 5 superheroes, you would get Batman, Superman, maybe the Hulk, maybe Spider-Man, maybe Wonder Woman.
And that's
But the average person on the street couldn't name an X-Men. So with Margaret Lesh at the helm, it really became, when you got the call, it's like, you're going to have to introduce this expanded family, this found family of people with these weird mutations and powers very quickly to an audience that's either going to buy in or they're going to turn the channel.
Yeah.
And it was a real challenge in those early days to figure out how to do that. And
so the first season was very much just setting up this world for everybody and introducing as many of the people as thoroughly as we could. And then, we didn't know if it could be picked up after that. We all let go after the first season.
Really?
Yeah. Hoping that it would be successful. And then it starts in January and does great, and they bring us back. And then we felt a little more freedom. Now we said, well, now we've kind of introduced this world, so now we can do more personal stories and get into them more deeply. And that was a real freeing thing.
And the X-Men animated series had sort of earned the trust of those who in power who were like, I don't know about this.
Pushback went away. It's funny how it works. As soon as it's something successful or makes the money or is high rated, they just problems.
But sold all the toys, right? So they were happy. All the merchandise couldn't get enough. And of course, the other thing that your which I forgot to mention earlier. But the other thing that your show did so well, which I think really was the first time that a show like this had done this, but it goes to what you were talking about regarding the first season and even a lot of the later seasons, is the whole idea of a whole, instead of single episode one and dones, you had a lot of overarching arcs.
Yeah.
Which was that, no, you're right. That was highly unusual in television at that time, but was really unusual in children's animation.
Yeah.
There had been the brilliant groundbreaking shows like Hill Street Blues or St. Elsewhere, where they allowed stories to be told over a period of episodes. But on the art side of the show, producer Will Mineo and director Larry Houston were big fans of the books.
Yeah,
we weren't, but
we
they knew the books and they understood how comic books told their stories, and it tended to be over a few issues.
Yeah, and so they pushed for it, and we on the writing staff really pushed for it because, my God, it's so much more satisfying to be able to tell something over 13 stories and let it build and grow and deepen. And we hadn't been allowed to do that before, and so they trusted us, and so it was again a good chance for us to show, okay, let's see if you can do a 5-part story, that kind of thing. And it worked out great for it. The writers were very thankful to have the chance to do it.
The pushback, the pushback had been as basic as, kids aren't going to be able to keep this straight. Kids will not be able to follow from one week to the next.
And that still happens, right? Like, it astounds me every time how, like, the people who are in charge of media for children continue to this day, despite how things have changed, seem to completely underestimate, like, what kids are capable of so-called getting. And yet it's the stuff that, personally speaking, of course, it's the stuff that treats kids like people and doesn't, like, feel the necessity to, like, dumb stuff down that kids gravitate more towards. And you would, I don't understand that mindset personally. But yeah,
Eric, you've always thought that if you write down to kids, the 4-year-old will watch it, but
no older kids going to watch something that they think's too young, but younger kids excited about trying something that's too old for them because their older brother and sister watching it, and they want to show that they can see it too. So it works doesn't work going down, and you try telling that to executives, and they can be kind of simple-minded sometimes. Not in this case, but in many other cases, they just don't get it.
And I will say it was amazing when word, because again, the process was very long. You started in February. We were writing episodes. The thing didn't air
properly till
January the next year. But to get the ratings information back on Saturday morning kids show, and to discover that the audience wasn't just children.
Yeah, it went the whole range with little children who didn't understand most of it, but just were caught up in the story and the colors.
Yeah, I still go back and rewatch episodes. So I get that. I can see that most definitely. So I suppose we should go back a bit. The person that you were talking about, I'm not even gonna.
Margaret Lesh.
Thank you. I just know I'll butcher it, so thank you. Yeah, like you were saying, she had been working at Marvel Animation for a while, right? So I had read both in your book and elsewhere, because when I enjoy something, I seek out as much information as I possibly can on it. It's just how my mind works. That she had been pushing for an X-Men show for a long, long time. And like you said, people weren't fighting. And she's the one responsible for, if I have this correct, the unaired pilot that would be later known as Pride of the X-Men, right?
Right, she was.
Outback Wolverine.
Yeah, Australia, yeah.
We can talk about that if you want.
Well, it's so obviously that didn't go anywhere. But so I'm assuming there's a correlation between Pride of the X-Men and X-Men the Animated Series, which obviously did make it not only made it to air, but lasted for quite some time. So I was wondering if you could touch on how that transition sort of happened.
Yeah, well, when Pride came out, and she was trying to use it as a sales tool to get someone to to buy off on a whole season of X-Men.
When she was at Marvel Entertainment and
Yeah.
Marvel Productions.
And the problem we found with it when we looked at it, because we all looked at it in 1992 when we started off the new show and looked back, a number of the same artists, 3 of the major artists that worked on our show drew that one, and it looked really nice.
It did. I will say that. I've seen it. I won't say how, but I've seen it. It looks really nice, but the story and characters and stuff.
Yeah, and so what the problem they had at the time was they had executives above them, above Margaret, more business people, marketing people, and they said, well, you have 22 minutes. We want to sell a lot of merchandise. Let's jam like 30 people into this 22 minutes.
Yeah. All the bad mutants, all the good mutants, put them all in there.
And there was no time. There was no time to get to know anybody, and or why this world was there or how it worked. So it was a case of starting off with great intentions and talented people, but the people with the money, the decision makers at the top, for that at that point, just made a poor choice in instead of letting, say, the writer and the artist tell the best story they could, they saw it as a 22-minute commercial and jammed it full of characters to where people couldn't really follow it or get caught up in it or fall in love with it.
Yeah.
So we saw the problem. Margaret in retrospect saw the problem, and since the artists had worked on that one before and they loved it, Bill Minio, Larry Houston, Rick Hoberg, they loved the X-Men. Mm-hmm. They kind of put their foot down for our show and said, we're not going to make that mistake again. We had a good deal of money. We had talented people. But we made the mistake of not focusing on the human stories the way that the best comic books, Chris Claremont's the best comic books do.
Right.
Let's go over to that. And so when they're talking to me and the half dozen writers that worked on the show the first season, including Julia, everybody's talking about let's tell deeper, less frantic, less spectacular, but more personal stories as we introduce this world so that people will fall in love with the characters and want to see more. And that was, that was great music to our ears. It's exactly the kind of stories we wanted to tell. So everybody was in sync, and they had this previous example of when people pushed it in the wrong direction. Back during Pride, they didn't, as artists, they didn't have the clout or the confidence to say, "No, that's wrong," and stand up against it. We had similar pressures during the first year producing this from business people, advertisers, whatever, and everybody had seen what had happened before and felt like, no, we're drawing a line in the sand. We know it's good for the show. If it fails, we'll fail with it. Fine, but this is. We're not negotiating this. We're to our guns, and it was wonderful because it was across the board as far as all the creative people. They all had the same vision for the show.
You mentioned Wolverine in Pride of the X. There were people in charge who were not as dedicated to the books at that time. What's the biggest movie of the year that year?
Yeah, I was wondering if it had to do with that. You're looking at the dates. Yeah.
And the folks in charge said, you know what? Kids love that movie. No one knows what a Canadian sounds like. Make Wolverine Australian.
Or they won't know what a Canadian. They won't know Wolverine's Canadian.
That's true. Yeah.
Just that. Yeah.
So those kinds of decisions are what hamstrung that first effort. And then, fortunately, the right people were moved into positions of power for X-Men, the animated series, and everyone was determined to try and do it right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I hear from you guys throughout all of this is it really sounds like everyone involved in this directly hands-on in this show. Like, this was everyone's kind of passion project. I mean, otherwise, why bother drawing a line in the sand, right? So. Right.
Yeah. Because sometimes doing that gets you fired.
Sure, right.
We got little babies to feed and we've got mortgages to pay. You don't do that lightly, but we all pretty much, it was, and I think it was a case of experience Will and Larry had been in the business 10 years. I'd been in business 7, 8 years. Margaret had been in business for 20 years.
But first, newly as
Yeah.
president of Fox Kids.
And
Sure,
we'd
yeah.
all been in positions
Again,
before.
she brought that passion to that
Yes.
position of power. So
Yeah, where we remembered times before when we maybe could have made a stand and didn't, and just it all kind of together said, well, this time we are. And it was great. I mean, it made for a really good creative atmosphere among the people actually on the ground producing the show, including Stephanie Graciano at Graz Entertainment, who kind of held the production all together.
Yep.
And she was behind us 100% when problems came up.
And they came up. They came up constantly.
Yeah, and
just really quickly, I'm sorry for those who might not know, that's the animation house that was right.
Yeah. It's the pre-production house, the design house. All the artists were hired by them. They made all the storyboards. They designed all the characters. They put together everything that you need into this huge boxes full of drawings and
model sheets,
recordings,
props,
whatever, and sent that overseas to be animated. So they built. They're like the artistic architects.
Okay. Like they were the ones making the blueprints and everything for how.
Yeah, of everything.
Yeah.
And so they were getting these they were getting 900,000 image storyboards out, one a week. Boom, 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 and with all the supporting materials to over and holding it together and doing it for budget. And that's one of the exciting but demanding things about doing series television like this is that new one, basically filing a story or filing a storyboard every week means you've got 8 or 9 going at once in various stages of creation, and you really have to keep track of stuff, because if it falls through the cracks, it comes back from overseas animation 4 months later, and the wrong people are saying are talking to each.
And that's happened.
Yeah,
or things get mixed up, lost. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, is that what happened with the episode that I believe, again, correct me if I'm wrong, aired out of order? Something like No Mutages is an Island, No Man is an Island, which was narratively obviously was supposed to be in between the Phoenix Saga, but chronologically came like way later.
It was a 2-year fight. Yeah, there were 2
years.
Yeah, there were
wow.
And that and one other episode went overseas, and they were trying out a cheaper animation house to see if they could maybe. And also, it was a big job, so they were not only looking for a cheaper place, but maybe a secondary place that would be enough to handle some of the business. And they didn't. They did such a terrible job. We really couldn't air it. And then there was a fight because it's a couple $100,000 worth of work, and the people that did it saying, "Oh, it looks good enough to us," and you're not. And
they're over there,
and no, you're not getting materials back, and our people say, "Well, we're not going to pay you if unless you fix all this." So that wasn't resolved quickly. That took a year to resolve, and then a lot of time to redo both shows. So yeah, that was just that is the downside of doing things in order.
Yeah,
because
the arcs.
Yeah, because Jean Grey dies at the end of the Phoenix Saga, and the next episode was supposed to be that memorial to her, and they're grieving her.
Scott leaves.
I mean, it was a beautiful episode, but since you already knew by that point, because it had been 2 seasons, what happens with Jean, like, it was kind of like an episode in a bottle sort of thing, right? Like, it was beautiful in its own way, and yet you already know how all of this is going to pan out. So
yeah, so that
we were lucky the internet wasn't alive back then.
Sure.
Yeah, people would have been freaking out
my God.
and taking names.
Yeah, exactly, and pillaring pillaring us for those kinds of accidents.
But luckily, the band stayed with it.
Yeah.
Speaking of, you had mentioned that during that first season, some silly suggestions were made to you guys. I wonder if it would be okay. You don't have to, but I'm just curious, like what would be one of the silly suggestions that you heard and was like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah, well, when we first started it,
And there was nothing else like it out there. Let's
Yeah.
be clear about that. It really was a different kind of thing.
so
Yeah.
luckily, Margaret and Will and Larry, everybody knew kind of what the X-Men needed to be. And when we read a few of the comics, we knew what the X-Men needed to be. But to his credit or discredit, Haim Saban was always absolutely straightforward and honest with everybody. He made his money by doing things as cheaply as possible.
And he was part of the production process.
And he was
in charge of the money.
And he had a handle in it. You know, he paid our checks. He did some overall organizing to get the show done. And we have to thank him for helping get the show done. It wouldn't have happened without him.
Right.
But as far as he was concerned, he didn't care about canon, about being true to Marvel's history. He would have been thrilled with stick figures. And so he was initially suggested that a simple way to do the show for a small budget would just be to have Professor X and one or two of the X-Men driving around in a van that had Cerebro in it, and looking and bumping into a new mutant finding a new mutant each week and having a little adventure in a small town.
And that was what most kids' shows had been kind of like.
Yeah. I mean, somehow my mind just, I would love someone to draw this. Just came up with X-Men meets kind of Scooby-Doo, you know?
And he was sincere. And if people like Will and Larry and Margaret had said, no, that's not
the X-Men.
Yeah, that would be
the show, we're doing it because we wanted to be true to the books, he could have gotten away with it. And those are the kind of times when you have to push back and say, no, if you want us to do the show, we're not doing that one.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was real. It was a real suggestion at a real meeting.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the only one at every stage, at every process.
Yeah. So it's challenging. It's challenging sometimes. Yeah. There was a toy. There's a toy problem that I think Marvel got into inadvertently. That somebody made a deal for like in Australia for Happy Meal toys, and got a call saying you had to put like Storm in a tricycle because that's what she would have. What the Happy Meal toy was. You have to put that in every episode, and we said, well,
Storm can fly. You realize that.
he doesn't need a tricycle.
Yeah.
Nito can levitate. He doesn't need a
Right,
car.
yeah. People don't need beer. Well, some of them do, like, yeah.
Yeah, and I love me a good Happy Meal. Don't get me
Well,
wrong.
me too, but that would be, bizarre. Not one of the Happy Meal toys that I would have wanted. That's okay, I'll say that. But it's funny you should mention as well how close you guys stay to the comics, because thinking of the proper way to say this, your show, I'm a huge comic book nerd. Why not? At this point, I read everything. But for the longest time, and my first true passion when it comes to comic books to this day is all of the X-related books, of which throughout the years there have been many. And like I have such a passion, such a knowledge, such everything for that. But again, it comes back to your show, because even though it was based on a pre-existing property, I didn't even know about this property before I saw your show. And unlike future adaptations, which, did their own thing to some extent or another, your show did such a great job of staying true to who these characters were, the world, everything, that when I became such a fan of your show, and was like, let's see what the comics are like, the transition between the two was, especially at that time, because you used pretty much the same team minus a couple members or so, is pretty much like flawless. Like, I went into the comics being like, all right, I already know Scott and Jean, Storm, like I wouldn't even know what these people's deal is. Which yeah.
That was the thing you were tapped with, because, like you said, the comic books came out, 1963, I think was the
Yes, originally, yeah.
So by 1992, when you were tapped to do the show, that was almost 30 years of
But those were very, very different.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
And that was kind of freeing too. The Marvel was very nice about this. They said, "Look, Eric, there've been over the 20 some years, there've been 29 different people who've been X-Men. We've moved them in and out. It's
yeah.
alive. They've been good. They've been bad. They've gotten along with each other. They've hated each other. Pick and choose what you think is the best mixture of X-Men, and what is the best mixture of relationships that's good for your TV show." And they were very supportive that way. They were. It wasn't like, "Oh my God, there's just one way to tell these stories. The Marvel's going to be bad if you do it." They were honest from the beginning and said, "Really, there are a dozen ways that you could make this story go. And with our help, let's find a way that we all really like and pick and choose." But that made us less worried about being exactly true to the details of certain books, because we knew there were other books that were different,
Right.
even with these same characters. So that was kind of freeing. And give a guy named Bob Harris was our mentor at Marvel, and he was in charge of all the X books at the time. There were 3 or 4 going, and so he was the one that I'd be faxing, not even emailing. Email had started yet.
New York City.
I wonder how many people watching this will completely understand and appreciate a whole pre-internet, email, Instagram, Facebook age, right?
You couldn't Google anything.
Nope. Yeah. Could not. Couldn't send anybody anything quickly. Right. I have receipts from the CVS pharmacy out here where we would take materials to be faxed to New York.
Ours broke down. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a whole different way. But I want to thank you for what you said about feeling authentic to the X-Men, the Marvel X-Men. There were not that many stories that were direct adaptations from the book.
But there were a lot of
bits and pieces. Yeah.
Yes.
You got the stories, not so much, but the characters, I would say.
Yeah.
Most
Thank
definitely. You're welcome. I'm glad you appreciated how I said that, because I was trying to think about how to say it. It's good to know I didn't mess up, but yeah. But, and because, as you were saying, Eric, there had been so many X-Men books throughout the years that the characters, the thing, right? Like, I mean, the stories, we had seen these same characters. I mean, I hadn't, but a lot of people had. There's so many different scenarios and settings that, sure, like, so having said that, I was wondering if you could touch on why you went with the core team that you ended up going with.
Sure. Yeah. It was like the interest of 3 or 4 different groups that helped form the team. Obviously, Marvel had a certain interest in people. There were 3 or 4 that everybody agreed on. That
very early on.
Yeah, that you needed Wolverine because it's so popular. You needed Cyclops, Storm, and
Jean.
Actually, believe it or not, when we were setting up the core team, Rogue and Gambit were suggested because they were Gambit and Jubilee were kind of new to Marvel at the time. They were trying to push them.
I'm pointing to the big picture of
it. Yeah, no, I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So
this picture here.
Yeah, it's a great picture, by the way.
You're missing a few people there.
And of all the things, after our first meeting, they hadn't mentioned Xavier, which is pretty amazing since he's the head.
Yeah.
They hadn't beat,
right,
and they hadn't mentioned Jean.
Right.
So, and we put Morph in just to kill him. So that was
okay. We can get back to that
one. But the point was, we were writing the first 3
or Beast.
Pardon me? Oh,
or Beast.
Beast was just going to be a guest. That's why he was in prison at the start. And so what happened was we started writing.
He was one of my favorites personally, so that surprises me.
And we started realizing we really couldn't tell the stories very well without Professor Xavier, because he's like the living embodiment
Yeah,
of
I don't know how you would do an X-Men show without
Yeah.
it. I honestly don't.
And we couldn't tell the stories we were finding without Jean, because she had this unique relationship with each of the people that she could talk to them the way nobody else could. And also the relationship with Scott, and the relationship, the more we used her, the more we realized we got to need her. And then the third one was Beast. And even though we were told we had to, all the writers liked him so much.
He was so great to write.
They kept on adding him back into stories and putting, he's like, he asserted himself and said, I'm going to be a main character just because
Well, that's Hank McCoy for you. I will discover. That's smart.
But also, Beast appeared to be the most comfortable in his mutation, but he was the most obviously different. He could not walk down the street without people going, "That's a big blue furry thing."
Right.
And yet, so him among
but
the
his soul, his, which you guys capture. So, I mean, he is the almost epitome of the whole idea of being a mutant, right? Because on surface level, he appears so frightening and like a big blue gorilla. But he has such a kind heart and soul and like quote Shakespeare and stuff that despite how he appears, you can't like help but fall in love with this guy.
Yeah.
But like you said, he's like truly the embodiment of struggle among within the world of the X-Men. That there are people who will.
You shouldn't judge them on a surface level because
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the team came together.
And Jubilee was,
and we needed. Everybody was saying we needed a teenager and
as a way in for the audience.
Young people, and the fact that Kitty Pryde had been the focus of the failed attempt made them think. Oh, they also Marvel was pushing Jubilee more at that time than Kitty.
She was newer to the books at that time.
So that was.
She got, I think, at around that time, or slightly later, maybe '94, they spun her off into sort of her own team book as well. So
right, so that she was someone that they were thrilled that we pushed, and we all agreed we needed at least one younger team member. So that was pretty easy choice.
And Gambit was also newer to the team at that time, but he had that great, can you really trust him kind of thing going on. Within the family unit was very interesting and for a lot of interesting dynamics.
Yeah, we were really the writers were pushing for the most different from each other, the most distinct from characters that we could get, because that just makes the writing so easy.
Yes.
If they're all the same.
If they're all Wolverine, Colossus.
If it's Wolverine, Colossus, Cable, Thunderbird, it's like six gruff guys beating.
Right.
It doesn't work. You need
G.I. Joe. Sure.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with G.I. Joe.
But not with but that's
But so that was the writer's hope on that, and even some things as mixture of powers, so they did repeat each other, so that the powers are different, and the personality, the human problems in each one's different, and that was we built that early, and it worked very well for us. I think it chose well at the beginning.
So it's funny. I was doing the math of like, I have 29 years or so worth of questions for you guys, but that would take forever. So I'm trying to like pick and choose. Obviously, were there any characters that you would have or stories that you would have liked to have used or done, but for whatever reason just never did?
We had one thing that happened, and it just was the inexperience of Mark Edens, who was I had the number one writer on the show for me, along with Julie, of course, but he's there for getting into an awful lot of the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
When we were laying out the second season, we thought that Jean and Scott were going to be married, and we laid
but at the end of episode one, season one. That was going to be it. That was the whole series.
Yeah. He said yes, and we thought, okay, we'll start the second season. They're married, and she's 7 months pregnant, has a big baby bump, and she's going around fighting supervillains and like that. They have a double mutant baby,
which would have been so cool.
And so we were going to,
the future comic book lover, I would have loved to have seen where that would have gone. But
we're going to layer that through the second season, and a number of our creative partners who we trust very much said, guys, even though everybody's watching the show, our core are still adolescent boys, and I'm not sure they want to see their mom out there 7 months pregnant in spandex fighting. So we pull back from that, and I think they've used it in the book since, where they had a double.
Yeah.
But it was one thing we pulled back. It would have been fun, but we found other fun stuff to do.
You mentioned other characters, perhaps. One of the big challenges was the team itself was so big. Trying to service that many characters well, it was its own challenge. And Nightcrawler was such a great character, and the episodes with him were so wonderful. But again, you don't get a chance. You've got to service a lot of players, and there wasn't as much time as you might think to say, let's tell a story about completely unrelated.
Yeah.
So we tended to think of, even if they were really good characters like Nightcrawler or Colossus or Iceman, we tended to think of them, well, maybe we can use them a couple times as guests,
right?
But we can't have them hanging around a lot because we got 8 or 9 people that we have to keep track of every story, and it's hard to squeeze more people in. And that was that. We would have liked to tell more stories like the Phoenix, that was 5 parts. It was 110 minutes,
which was
amazing. By the way, again, that was my introduction to that whole saga before later reading it in the comics. So that was fantastic.
So that those if you have a longer thing, or let's say a DVD, direct to video DVD or something, then you've got a lot more space to introduce more people. But in 22-minute stories, it's kind of hard to squeeze more people in. So it was already pretty full for us.
Makes sense. Having such a great time, I have no idea as to the time. All right. I'm sorry.
We can go till 4, but we kind of have a hard deadline after that. So I mean,
till 4. Sorry,
till
we're on a different coast. 4 for you would be 7 for me, right? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, one quick question, and then we should really plug the amazing book. But I read in the book, I've both books, one digitally on Kindle, got it as soon as it first came out, and then I got the other book, which you saw me take the photo of. Both are great, but I had read in there that one story idea that you had thought about possibly doing was completely overhauling the team. Is that correct?
At the end, yeah.
Yeah. Scooch a little closer.
I was wondering if, hey, I did my research. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
So you had been tasked with doing 65 episodes, which is typical, ultimately, the number for a series. So the last 4 episodes of those 65
were going to be this big blowout 4-part thing, which was Beyond Good and Evil, which ended up being
another great, and so many cameos in that.
So we were told, make this as big a story as you can.
It's the finale for the series.
And
go out big.
And so we start out and said, in the story, set up that 4 or 5 of the X-Men have something else that they maybe want to do, or are becoming dissatisfied, or may want to leave, and
at the end
introduce or focus on 4 or 5 new people that at the end of the 4-part story may want to stay and become X-Men.
So the series will end.
So the series would end.
So you weren't really going to tell stories with that team. They were kind of being set up for, even if you don't see it on TV, the saga continues.
The saga could and leave the audience as we finish off the series with this fun idea that it's going to be a new, if there's another series, a new group of X-Men.
Yeah.
And the 4 that we're going to stay that were new were Bishop and Shard from the future. They were going to get they couldn't make it back to the future. They were going to be stranded in our time, and so they're going to be adopted by the X-Men. And there was Archangel and Psylocke. So those 4 were going to
met each other in the show in that 6-part.
Right, exactly. And the people leaving were Gene and Scott, who were going off to have a family.
I believe
and Storm was going, and Executive Reviewer was going, and Jubilee was going off to hang with some New Mutants, which was happening in the books.
Yeah.
So 5 were going, and the 4 new people were coming in.
And that was how the series was going to end.
And then we'd written the whole 4-part script,
Yep.
ready to go into production, and they're going to call saying, "Oh, so sorry, we've just got a deal to do 11 more stories, so you can't change the team, even though you set it all up in the story. You can tease them that some people might love everybody that's there needs to stay, and everybody that's guesting needs to leave."
But the whole thing's been written already. It already exists.
Right, we already we wrote the end. Literally, it's in there. Like,
Yeah.
And we had, but it's just part of being a professional that, okay, fine, they want to do another 11.
I will say that final season had a lot of stories that I loved. The adaptation of Kitty's fairy tale, except now with Jubilee. The origin of Sinister. Some great stories. The animation style of that final season.
Oh my God. It was all money. It was all about the money, and trying to find a cheaper studio to do it for less. Not that we had any say in this, but just
right, of course.
What was going on.
And you're right. There's half a dozen stories in that out of those 11 that I'm really thrilled to be able to do. The one with your background.
Yeah.
It was such a heartwarming story. Although knowing what I do about how you were originally planning on ending it, I wonder which one would have thematically served a better ending. Because either Johnny going off to space or people disbanding and new people.
Yeah. Well, this one makes me cry.
It does.
Absolutely, me too. Every time. It's so touching.
Yeah.
And so the episode Old Soldiers, which
had Captain America.
And that one was written. We got to give props to by Len Wein, who was the co-creator of Wolverine in the books. And it's like, oh my God, you got to work with him.
That's amazing.
This episode.
And that was his story that he submitted for that episode?
What it was Len had written 3 stories, 3 of the episodes before. And I called him and said, well, we just got this order for another 11. I know you're off on other things, but is there anything that we could offer you to do one more for us? And he said, well, how about if I get to do a Captain America story with Wolverine? I always wanted to do that. And we said, well, we don't have the rights to that, but maybe we can call the Marvel lawyers. And it took a 3 weeks, but they got the okay to use Captain America in our
because
show.
Len Wein called.
And how do you say no to him?
So that's how that worked, and he got to do his favorite story.
That's a great. I even love how you introduced this. Of course, this was before the whole Weapon X thing, the artificial claws and stuff like that. It was fantastic.
Oh yeah.
I do want to quickly show off your book, as well as finish with. I had read a couple of years back that you guys were in talks now with Disney about perhaps bringing the series back. Of course, since then, there have been some unfortunate, I don't want to say developments. There have been some unfortunate occurrences regarding that original show. So I'm just wondering where that is now.
If we just to clarify, no one has ever called us, and we haven't been able to get to anyone. We are not among those who may have had a chance to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Just to clarify there.
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we've called a couple times, and we're in touch with all the artists and cast members.
Oh,
yes. But there we are.
That's it. Oh my
And
gosh.
it's you guys like the photos, so you must know, like when I ordered, so I got this off of Amazon for shipping, and I loved what you did with the original book, and I read that this was supposed to be more, so of course I was going to get it.
Just wave that one there.
Thank you. Mine is on my iPad, but yes.
There you go.
But I was like, this is a really big, hefty book with
Nearly 4 pounds of art that hasn't seen the light of day in almost 30 years.
you were talking about like storyboards. And
Yes.
stuff. Unfortunately, the background is doesn't want to show it for better or for worse. But Yeah.
we got to talk and work directly with Larry Houston, Rick Hoberg, the folks who were the artists who made the show what it was. And fortunately, Larry Houston had about 2 or 3 storage units that we got to like do an Indiana Jones dig through.
He had boxes of stuff. We had boxes of stuff, and it's funny how
That's all they are out.
Yeah, but it's fun. People don't realize 99% of the stuff is gone now. It's just been thrown away.
Oh,
and
it was not
sad to hear that. It's
all this beautiful, hand art, and we were lucky to find the ones we found.
Yes.
And just enough to make the book as beautiful as it is. And there's a wonderful gallery, Van Eaton Gallery, that has a few hundred of the cells
in Sherman Oaks, California.
Yeah, and they were they let us anything they had. They were completely supportive, and there were 2 or 3 artists that had kept all who were in charge of the character designs, the black and white pen character designs.
Credit to Mark
and
they kept all of them. The way we kept all the scripts, the artists kept all character designs,
and that was dumb luck for us.
It's literally seriously an amazing. Like there are layouts, like nothing showing up, but there are layouts, the war room. It's. I mean, seriously, people watching, I can not recommend this book enough. It's seriously wow.
And Larry Houston and Rick Hoberg did the fresh art for
the covers.
Yeah, the which thematically the front and the back with the heroes and the villains.
Will Mineo designed a brand new art for X-Men. That's in the book.
A couple of pages of Will stuff. So it was wonderful bringing back artists, 27 years later.
Oh my gosh!
And have them, come up with original stuff for the book. The people that gave us the look of the show.
The reason. Thank you for previously on X-Men, the making of an animated series. Eric's kind of oral history of the show.
That
was done and came out in
some illustrations in it, but this is
came out in 2017. But that was kind of a labor of love. Marvel was still in disarray. Disney hadn't purchased them yet. The rights were everywhere. There was no. This was just one.
We just did that ourselves. But that book, besides having a lot more interviews in it, and a lot of it got us this book because the people at Marvel, once they got the rights, they saw that book. Well, look, let's have them do it. Let's have them do it with all the artwork.
So when we got the call, it was first we thought they were going to shut us down because of previously on X-Men.
Because it was kind of
we're real big fans of that, and we'd like to do some coffee table books. And this is
our first one.
This is the first one we want to do. We do like to be a part of it. And immediately we're going, yay! But then suddenly we're not the artists. Are we going to be able to find the art?
Yeah.
So it was.
I had to do a lot of digging.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to. I mean, of course, I could, like I said, continue to interview you guys for another 6 hours. I'd love to have you guys back at some point if that's okay.
Thank you.
Of course, you guys have such a large presence now online. Where can people follow you, find you?
Thank you. I'm going to point up here. If you're on Twitter, that's me being me on Twitter for TAS. That's for X-Men the Animated Series. We have a page on Facebook, X-Men TAS. We're trying to figure out Instagram, and we are.
You guys are on there, and in fact, I've been noticing if people tag you guys, like you retweet Instagram photos, like for showrunners, you guys are like heavily involved in the community. I also want to say so.
And we are working on our website, which is xmentas.com.
It's under construction. Right
once that goes online, when Eric was writing the book previous on X-Men, did a lot of behind the scenes posts there.
Yeah.
And since
I
then,
checked it out.
Okay. Since then, just you could do an entire website just on the various versions of X-Men the Animated Series theme song. There are so many amazing versions out
there. There are. But
whatever you want, but so we're trying to bring that kind of X-Men love together on our website.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It was great having you, meeting you.
It's our pleasure, Evan.
Bye.